I remember the first time I truly noticed it, the relentless drag of exhaustion that clung to me every morning, even after what should have been a solid night's sleep. I'd wake up feeling like I just run a marathon, my mind foggy, my body aching for rest I never seemed to get. For a long time, I brushed it off as the normal wear and tear of daily life, convinced that pushing through would somehow build resilience. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. There was a part of me that felt disconnected from the energy and vitality I used to take for granted. It wasn't just about being tired. It was the subtle, insidious collapse of everything that made me feel like myself. Not just my physical strength, but my confidence, my drive, the very pulse of who I was. I caught myself scrolling through my phone for hours, chasing fleeting moments of excitement in the form of notifications and quick dopamine hits, only to feel emptier afterward. My nights were restless, with brief awakenings that shattered any hope of deep, restorative sleep. The stress that once felt manageable now sat heavily on my chest, like an invisible weight tethering me to fatigue. I was trapped in a cycle of chasing energy I couldn't find, and it left me frustrated, confused, and desperate. One evening, after yet another restless night, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. The eyes staring back looked different, worn out, dull, a shadow of the man I remembered. It stirred something inside me. I asked myself, why do I feel like I'm running on empty, even when I'm not doing anything physically exhausting? What's stopping my body from truly recovering? That question perched itself in my mind, refusing to be ignored. I started to realize that the problem wasn't just surface-level tiredness. It was something deeper, hidden beneath the busy rush and constant stimulation of everyday life. I found myself wondering about the typical notions of recovery. We often hear about rest in terms of sleep and relaxation, but what if those weren't enough? What if my body wasn't just tired from lack of rest, but was actually unable to transition into the kind of deep recovery my system needed? What if the environment around me, the constant buzzing of technology, the endless stream of distractions, stress that never quite lets up, was keeping my body in a state of alertness where true healing could never happen? That realization hit me hard. It seemed like the modern world was designed to keep me in a state of constant readiness, constantly seeking the next hit of stimulation, the next distraction, the next quick fix to numb the fatigue. But instead of recovering, my body was stuck in survival mode. I could see how, despite spending hours in bed, my sleep was fragmented, my mind restless. Even when I sat still, my brain craved more input, more excitement, a chase that never ends. It was as if my body was caught between a storm and a wall, unable to slow down because the world around me wouldn't let me, and unable to feel alive because I wasn't allowing myself to truly rest. In moments of quiet, I began to feel uneasy about this constant state of hyperactivity. It wasn't just about being busy or stressed. It was about how my body responded to these pressures. I felt this tug-of-war inside me, a deep longing to feel powerful and energized again, but being trapped by a cycle that seemed impossible to break. I realized that the energy I craved wasn't a simple thing to reclaim. It required understanding and facing the complex forces at play. What's been even harder is that this isn't a problem anyone talks about openly. We live in a culture that glorifies hustle and push, where the idea of slowing down or stepping back can feel like failure or weakness. I remember feeling ashamed for needing rest, for wanting relief. But what if this exhaustion isn't a sign of weakness but a cry from our bodies demanding something fundamental, a different kind of care? This story isn't just mine. It's a shared narrative among men who feel robbed of vitality by habits and circumstances beyond their control. We wake up tired, go through the day looking for quick hits of energy, and crash at night defeated by our own bodies. Somewhere in this endless cycle, we forget that true strength doesn't come from constant activity or forcing ourselves to stay alert. It comes from allowing the body to find safety, to slow down, and to heal. I want to take you with me on this journey because breaking this pattern requires more than glimpsing the problem. It requires unraveling the tangled web of what's keeping us in this state. There's a truth here that feels too often ignored. Our bodies can't repair, rebuild, or restore when they're constantly pushed to be on. The more I understood this, the more I realized that real recovery, the kind that fuels our energy and vitality, depends on something our modern lives actively prevent. I'm inviting you to explore this with me, not through quick fixes or motivational cliches, but by experiencing a clear-eyed look at the realities we face. Because once we understand the forces trapping our bodies in exhaustion, we open a door to reclaiming the power that feels lost. The journey won't be easy, but it's necessary, and it's awaiting us just beyond the surface of this everyday fatigue. Before we dive deeper, I want you to pause and reflect. Which part of this feels most familiar to you? Is it the exhausting chase for stimulation, the sleepless nights that blur together, or that constant, nagging sense of internal wear and tear always simmering beneath? Knowing where your experience starts is the first step. That personal awareness will guide every change that follows. There was a moment when I realized that how I moved through my day shaped more than my schedule. It carved out the very conditions for my body's restoration. Early on, I'd think that recovery was simply the absence of effort, a passive pause between tasks. But over time, I noticed that resting without intention left me tangled in restless thoughts, racing heartbeats, and a mind unwilling to let go. One evening, after a long day filled with back-to-back meetings and buzzing devices, I sat outside under the dim glow of fading twilight, hoping for calm. The air was cool and still, but inside me, a storm raged. The anxious chatter, the urgent impulses, the scattered mental fragments refusing to settle. Then it struck me. Healing demands more than rest. It calls for creating space where the nervous system can slip into a realm of regulation and safety. Each habit, gesture, and posture mattered to that delicate switch inside me. I recalled how, sometimes, simply forcing myself out of bed to stretch gently brought waves of calm that no amount of screen time could mimic. The difference was subtle yet profound. Engaging the body in slow, deliberate movement paved a path away from the relentless buzz of alertness. I learned that movement isn't always about high intensity. Often, it's about signaling safety through rhythm and presence, reminding my system that threat has lifted, and peace can grow from that ground. One afternoon, I met an old friend at a quiet park and told him about this unraveling inside. He nodded knowingly and shared his ritual. A series of deep diaphragmatic breaths combined with slow neck and shoulder releases each evening. A simple reclaiming of calm after a taxing day. "It's my way of telling my mind to shut down the alarms," he said with a smile. Intrigued, I tried it that very night. Lying on the floor, eyes closed, focusing intently on the rise and fall of my breath, I sensed the tight coils in my chest unspooling. For the first time in months, my pulse slowed organically, no frantic effort needed. It felt like returning to a place where my body recognized comfort again. A space I hadn't allowed myself to visit in too long. Of course, integrating these moments of stillness wasn't seamless. During the busy mornings, the compulsive urge to check notifications often commandeered my attention, pulling me out of breathing or stretching. The challenge was not only finding time but resisting the gravitational pull of hustle and distraction. I started to notice an internal dialogue. "I don't have time for this," or "If I stop now, I'll fall behind." Those voices echoed culturally accepted ideas that busyness equates with worth, that slowing down feels like losing control. But as I pressed gently against those narratives, something shifted. I realized I was engaged in a quiet rebellion, not in grand gestures but in the small, seemingly mundane acts of creating intentional pauses. Even during chaotic days, carving out moments to breathe deliberately or walk with awareness, even if only for 5 minutes, began to accumulate. The nervous system started to respond in kind, as if recognizing signals it hadn't received in ages. Like tuning an instrument, each act of mindful presence recalibrated my internal rhythm, allowing spaces where deep rest and repair might flourish. This process also uncovered a surprising ally: nature. On a weekend hike into dense woods, far from the city's clanging noise and artificial light, I found my breath slowing without effort. The layered sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls drew me into an embodied stillness that felt sacred and rare. My body seemed to breathe in the environment, and in return, it exhaled tension and unease. In those moments, unrelated worries dissolved, replaced by a sense of belonging and calm that felt deeply regenerative. I understood then how disconnection from natural surroundings might amplify modern restlessness, depriving us of primal cues our physiology thrives on. One day, as I sat beside a slow-flowing river, I noticed children laughing in the distance, their uninhibited play a stark contrast to my habitual tension. Watching them, I realized that their energy cycled effortlessly through bursts of activity and rest, with no guilt or resistance. Their nervous systems embroidered moments of excitement with equally vivid spells of relaxation. I wondered how much of adult life's persistent edge originates from suppressing these natural rhythms in favor of constant action. Facing these realizations brought fresh determination. I began experimenting with transition rituals between work and rest. Simple habits like turning off screens an hour before bed, dimming lights, sipping herbal tea while leaning into softness rather than rushing toward tasks. Some nights, I journaled brief reflections, giving voice to residual tension before sleep, like unloading a heavy pack. These acts, though small, created an atmosphere where the signals to cease fight or flight gained permission to rise. What struck me most was how patience became paramount. Recovery couldn't be summoned instantly through a checklist. It emerged gradually as I layered intentions with consistent tenderness. The body didn't flip a switch but learned to recognize safety again over time. Sometimes progress felt slow or nonlinear, but each encounter with presence and stillness fortified the capacity for deeper restoration. Now, consider how this applies when you face pressure that tightens your chest before sleep or the urge to scroll endlessly through feeds despite exhaustion. These moments reveal where your nervous system remains vigilant rather than relaxed. Your invitation, then, is to cultivate gentle signals of safety, perhaps through breathing, movement, or sensory shifts that whisper the body into a sanctuary of calm. I'm walking alongside you in discovering that healing energy springs not from hurried breaks but from fostering environments, inside and out, that nurture restoration at the nervous system's core. Through this lens, recovery becomes a practice of reestablishing trust with ourselves, a patient unfolding rooted in presence and self-kindness. It's within these tender spaces that true renewal begins to inscribe its course. There was a night when exhaustion weighed on me so heavily that I could barely drag myself to the edge of consciousness. Yet beneath that physical fatigue, a more elusive restlessness simmered, a kind of internal resistance that refused to yield to mere sleep. I recall lying there, the ceiling blurred by the shadows of night, my mind tangled not with worries but a persistent inability to truly disengage. It felt as if some unseen force was keeping me tethered to alertness, whispering that the fight was not yet over. In that moment, I sensed that true restoration calls for more than surrendering to darkness. It demands a surrender of tension threaded deep within, a release of held patterns that stretch far beyond physical tiredness. One of the clearest turning points came during a weekend retreat to a quiet lakeside cabin. The stillness of the place was almost foreign. No buzzing devices, no rush of urban sounds. Just a vast, placid lake reflecting a silver moon. As I settled into an old rocking chair on the porch, the chill air brushed against my skin like a subtle invitation to let go. Over the next few days, my focus shifted from chasing rest to cultivating presence. A deliberate commitment to notice when tightness crept into my shoulders or a jittery impulse rushed through me. I began tracking the invisible tension held around my jaw, the subtle arch of my spine that whispered stress even in repose. These were signals often overlooked but crucial in crafting an environment of real renewal. The shift was not merely about physical relaxation but about becoming fluent in the language of internal resistance. I discovered how habitual patterns of constriction, like clenched fists or shallow breaths, carried embedded stories of alertness and urgency. Recognizing this, I experimented with simple practices that invited expansion instead. One morning I tried a slow, spiraling stretch that extended from my fingertips to my toes, deliberately inviting length and unwinding. That act alone felt like a soft rebellion, a way to carve out new possibilities within my own frame. It wasn't so much about movement as it was about unlearning the rigidity I had let seep into daily living. What surprised me most was how subtle shifts began reshaping my relationship with downtime. Instead of viewing stillness as a battleground where I had to conquer restlessness, I started welcoming it as a co-creator in my healing. experiencing moments of quiet without judgment transformed from a passive state to an active engagement, a gentle dialogue between mind and form. While sitting outside during a cool autumn afternoon, I let my gaze drift over the flicker of golden leaves, feeling the rhythm of my breath synchronize with their slow dance to the ground. This deepened my understanding that recovery thrives when pace and expectation soften, allowing restoration to emerge organically rather than being forced. At one point, I committed to a week of deliberately disconnecting each evening from screens and external noise. It was tough at first. A storm of boredom and craving rose up, pressing hard against the novelty of silence. But as days passed, I noticed a remarkable recalibration taking place. Without the usual flood of external inputs, latent tension no longer had a way to hide behind distraction. I began to sense fluctuating waves of calm and unrest passing through me like tides. This new awareness invited a kind of respect for my internal tempo, instead of trying to override it with busyness or numbing input. Another encounter that deepened my journey occurred during a midweek yoga session led by a teacher who emphasized awareness of micro-movements and emotional releases. As I moved through stretches I'd done countless times before, I detected subtle shifts. A releasing of hold around the hips, a softening of the throat, even the surrender of a rigid thought pattern that clung stubbornly. The class didn't push me harder, but rather coaxed my awareness inward, toward the quiet places where tension gathered quietly over years. Afterward, a sensation of spaciousness lingered, as if previously crowded chambers had opened to admit fresh air. Now, picture a typical scenario where stress clenches your chest as the day winds down, yet the urge to keep checking your phone or eat mindlessly surges. These impulses are more than habits. They're attempts to fill a void where ease should reside. Recognizing that emptiness as an invitation opens the door to consciously inviting softness into those moments. Perhaps it's a touch, a hand over the heart, or a grounding gesture, like pressing bare feet into cool earth. These seemingly small acts become extensions of a larger quiet revolution within, a reclaiming of sovereignty over rest. Throughout this process, what grew clearer is that surrendering rest isn't a one-time event but a continuous unfolding. Old patterns of tension will test the boundaries of this new terrain, demanding patience and gentleness as allies. Yet with persistent nurturance, those moments of surrender lengthen and deepen, transforming from fleeting reprieves into sustainable rhythms. Healing finds fertile ground not in abrupt interruptions but in the gradual weaving together of intention and surrender. In the soft glow of dawn, as I breathe in stillness and exhale held strain, I recognize that true restoration is a dance, an intimate exchange where steadfastness meets surrender. It's a journey into the quiet spaces most overlooked but most essential. And here, within this delicate balance, I begin to know freedom anew. I never imagined how deeply my environment could influence something as fundamental as my hormonal balance until one evening when I chose to step outside my usual rhythms. A friend had invited me to an evening by the ocean, away from the city's constant hum and glare. The air was crisp and salty, carrying a veil of calming quiet that wrapped around me like a soft blanket. As I stood barefoot on the cool sand, waves rhythmically folding onto the shore, I sensed a shift, a subtle whisper that something within was loosening its grip on tension I hadn't even noticed was so tight. That night, as I lay beneath a vast expanse of stars, I became acutely aware of how modern stimuli bombard us on a level beyond attention. Our cells seemed wired to respond to this barrage in a way that muffles their ability to heal and regenerate. Moving away from artificial light and the clatter of screens unlocked a dormant rhythm inside, one that favored slow, balanced pulses rather than frantic bursts of energy. I began to understand that reclaiming inner harmony isn't found in a checklist of actions but in reintroducing elemental forces, the gentleness of deep shadows, the hum of natural cycles, the whispered guidance of elemental forces that coax us toward genuine restoration. Returning home, I set out to replicate pieces of that experience. One afternoon, I rearranged my living space, stripping away clutter and softening harsh lighting. I introduced plants, their vibrant green a signpost for life and renewal. Suddenly, mundane moments like sipping water or simply sitting in quiet transformed, each act becoming an invitation for peace. What stirred me most was observing how these changes began to affect my mood. Irritability softened, impatience melted, and a subtle but persistent calm took up residence. It was as if the environment I built around me became a silent partner in healing rather than an adversary demanding constant alertness. A colleague of mine shared an intriguing practice she'd adopted to balance mental chaos: a daily sensory fast. She committed to periods of intentional silence, deliberately shutting out all stimuli. No music, no screens, no overwhelming conversation. At first, she described the experience as unnerving, like stepping into a vacuum that magnified internal noise. Yet over days, she noticed a grounding effect as her mind settled into a more spacious, fluid state. Hearing this, I decided to attempt something similar. The first attempt lasted just 20 minutes, filled with restless energy and cravings to escape the quiet. But in the stillness, beneath the surface agitation, I stumbled upon fragments of clarity and a deep breath that seemed to reach into my marrow. One evening, while sitting at my kitchen table in near-complete darkness with just a candle burning, I noticed how the flickering flame demanded minimal attention yet invited profound focus. The delicate dance of light and shadow became an anchor, pulling me away from mental chaos toward a place of embodied presence. That balance between absence and flicker fostered a sense of safety unlike anything screens or loud music could offer. I found poetry in this fragile moment. Restoration might dwell not in grand gestures, but in gentle flickers that allow weary systems to regain their strength without overwhelm. Another pivotal moment unraveled during a solo hike in a remote forest. The world seemed curiously still, each footstep swallowed by moss and fallen leaves. I was alone with no distractions, forced to listen deeply to my breathing, footsteps, and a subtle and constant flow of life around me. It dawned on me that this immersion triggered release. Emotions and physical tensions surfacing in waves, culminating in tears I hadn't anticipated. The unspoken conversation between my senses and the wildness surrounding me fostered an unguarded surrender that felt both vulnerable and sacred. Only then did I grasp that true recuperation requires surrender to something larger than personal will, an embrace of cycles beyond human control. Back in civilization, this lesson translated into daily habits rooted in attunement rather than control. I began greeting each morning with a ritual, a few moments standing near an open window, feeling the breath of fresh air against skin, consciously breathing in rhythm with gentle movement. This simple act anchored me before the demands of the day seized my attention, creating a protective bloom of calm that buffered against stress. Unexpectedly, these moments accumulated strength, gifting me resilience that didn't feel forced or fleeting but steady and rising from deep within. Now, consider how you approach transitions between high-energy work and intended rest. Do you allow space for senses to recalibrate? Or does your rhythm jump abruptly from intensity to attempted calm? Allowing gradual sensory shifts, such as dimming lights, quieting nearby sounds, or touching an object with texture, can open pathways for deep recharge. We often overlook these subtle environmental cues, yet they serve as messengers to forgotten parts of ourselves yearning for equilibrium. Finally, a quiet but persistent truth settled into my experience. Wellness isn't merely a fight against external stressors, but a dance of harmony with the spaces and energies that surround us. By embracing the ancient wisdom embedded in natural light, sound, and air, I learned to offer myself the nourishment of presence. This invitation to slow, soften, and surrender became an unassuming foundation upon which restoration could unfold. Not hurried or forced, but flowing like water shaped by the contours of time and attention. Reflecting on this journey so far, I feel as if I've been walking through a dense forest shrouded in mist, each step revealing glimpses of a path, weaving quietly beneath the layers of undergrowth. There's no abrupt clearing yet, only an awareness of intertwined roots anchoring the earth and delicate leaves reaching for light above. This interplay, silent but relentless, mirrors the intricate forces at work within us, waiting patiently to be acknowledged and brought into harmony. I recall moments when my breath felt heavy, caught in a web of subtle tensions that flickered through my limbs like whispers from a place of endurance and hidden strain. It was as if a deeper current stirred beneath surface motions, drawing me into a landscape both unfamiliar and intimate. The senses sharpened, but the experience wasn't simply sensory input. It was a dialogue unfolding below conscious thoughts, an exchange between layers of being signaling through quiet pulses and shadows. The body spoke in rhythms unfamiliar to habitual awareness, encouraging me to move more gently through the internal terrain, to become attuned to rhythms that often elude hurried minds. With each attempt to step lightly among these internal spaces, I sensed a gradual unraveling of barricades held too tightly. There was a tenderness in this dismantling, a soft surrender that allowed what was strained or contracted to soften naturally rather than by force. It occurred to me that the most profound shifts emerge not from confrontation but from this quiet opening, a patient easing into responsiveness that the body and mind both recognize as safety. Much like a river carving its course with steady persistence beneath stones, sometimes invisible yet unquestionably shaping the terrain, healing carves channels of relief in places thought impenetrable. As I navigated this terrain, I found that moments of stillness were not pauses from life but living spaces themselves. Breathing rooms where the orchestration of internal balance wove its threads with subtle precision. They felt less like interruptions and more like invitations to deepen connection, to lean into an intuitive intelligence that transcends words. In these spaces, I glimpsed the profound eloquence of tending to oneself with patient curiosity, the kind that moves beyond judgment and into genuine care. An evening breeze brushing past my skin once reminded me how delicate signals from the world around can ripple through our being, stirring dormant awareness. The sunlight filtering through leaves seemed to herald a new kind of permission, the freedom to rest in presence without expectation or urgency. Such ephemeral moments held the power to realign fragmented rhythms, as if invisible hands were weaving threads back into a tapestry stretched thin by relentless tension. In conversations with others who share this quest, I've heard echoes of the same subtle struggle, the difficulty of surrendering to rhythms that feel slower, softer, even fragile in contrast to the relentless pace life often demands. We find ourselves caught in contradictory pulls, the compulsion to push forward and the deep, aching urge to return home to ourselves. Navigating this dynamic requires courage of a different sort, one less visible or heralded, yet just as vital, a willingness to trust the unhurried unfolding that quietly nurtures regeneration. Sometimes I imagine this process as tending a garden in late autumn. The soil holds the memory of summer's fullness, but is now preparing for rest beneath fallen leaves and shrinking light. It does not resist the season's slowing. Instead, it embraces it, knowing beneath the stillness, rich transformation is underway. There is a humility in this waiting, a faith in cycles that resist haste, a reverence for timing inaccessible to willpower alone. This metaphor pulses with meaning as I continue walking the path, sensing how patience, gentleness, and attentive presence can cultivate fertile ground for renewal. Now, as we stand on the cusp of deeper insight, I sense a gathering within, a quiet momentum built from threads of awareness and intention intertwined. There is a palpable invitation to step beyond the familiar patterns of striving and surrender into a more profound relationship with myself, my body, and the subtle forces that govern wholeness. The tension between movement and stillness, action and reception, begins to dissolve into a dance we can learn to inhabit with trust. In these moments, I feel a stirring of hope, not the flashy restlessness of new beginnings, but a deeply rooted conviction that opening space for our natural cycles reshapes everything. It calls us to embrace complexity with humility and to honor the wisdom embedded in every quiet, incremental shift. The horizon beyond this mist-shrouded forest beckons with quiet light, urging us to step forward into clarity patiently drawn, ready to welcome what has long awaited our presence. As twilight deepened one evening, I found myself standing at the edge of a quiet lake, the water so still it mirrored the sky as if holding secrets beneath its surface. The cool air brushed my skin, carrying with it a quiet invitation to pause, to listen beyond the usual noise that so often commanded my attention. In that moment, something shifted. Not a sudden revelation, but a gentle unfolding, like the petals of a flower opening slowly to the sun. I felt the weight of relentless movement and scattered energy dissolve, replaced by a subtle knowing that rest holds power in ways I had long overlooked. There's an almost sacred quality to surrendering into vulnerability, allowing the tensions woven into each breath and thought to unravel patiently. I have walked the roads of exhaustion, chasing elusive peaks of drive, fueled by bursts of stimulation that promised vitality but delivered only fleeting sparks. Yet, encountering the quiet within that lake's cool reflection reminded me that vitality arises not through constant pursuit, but through honoring rhythms that move at their own deliberate pace. This kind of energy flows when attention softens and presence roots itself deeply in acceptance, even when it means embracing stillness that feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable at first. I remember talking with someone who, after years of pushing through weariness, described their own transformation as relearning the art of receiving. For so long, they said, I thought strength meant to battle through every day, to shove exhaustion to the margins. But strength also lives in opening up, in letting the self be replenished by the quiet moments I once resisted. Their words echoed the pulse of my own journey, a dance between the urge to control and the grace found in allowing. It's as if healing invites a partnership between effort and ease, teaching us to listen not only to drive but also to rest's deep wisdom. What lingers with me most are the subtle exchanges, the brush of cool air on skin, the soft fading of artificial light, the gentle cadence of breath easing from shallow to deep. These experiences have taught me that what sustains us doesn't require grand gestures or drastic measures. Instead, it grows through small acts of kindness extended inward. A mindful pause before sleep, a walk without purpose but full of attention, a moment to breathe fully when impulses threaten to rush past. Such practices awaken a dormant vitality, a source of strength that renews quietly beneath awareness. I've come to understand that reclaiming this steady energy means redefining how I relate to stimulation, rest, and recovery. It's less a battle and more an invitation to co-create space where life's tensions can dissolve without force, where the natural intelligence of renewal is respected and supported. By cultivating patience with the process, the uneven rhythms, the waiting, the openings that come like whispers in the night, I discover resilience emerges not from pushing harder but from unfolding more gently. Tonight, as I reflect by that same lake in memory, I'm drawn to share this invitation with you. Allow yourself the grace to step back from the relentless chase. Notice where your breath tightens and loosen it with curiosity. Seek the moments that welcome silence and stillness, even if they feel foreign at first. Trust that beneath the surface exhaustion lies a wellspring of energy waiting patiently for your recognition. It is not a distant prize to be earned, but a shifting pulse accessible each time you choose presence over distraction, softness over resistance. Our rhythms may have been dulled by an overstimulated life, but they are alive within us, waiting to awaken. The path toward balance and renewal is not marked by perfection or urgency, but by consistent attention and compassion extended toward ourselves. Healing unfolds not as a destination but as a return, to a natural, unhurried pulse that carries power with quiet certainty. We are invited to become witnesses to this unfolding, honoring every step, every pause, every breath as a vital thread in the tapestry of our growth. In choosing to reclaim that space where restoration thrives, we come home to a strength that moves beyond struggle, an enduring vitality born in the embrace of calm. And there, beneath the weight of modern chaos, we find the courage to breathe deeply, to heal fully, and to live with renewed intensity grounded in gentle presence.